All right, let's get right into it. We're going to explore the science behind one of horror's most terrifying ideas, demonic possession. I mean, what really happens when it looks like a person's mind has been completely taken over by something else? Is it truly supernatural, or is there something deeper, something scientific, happening inside our own brains?
You've seen this phrase before, right? You see it on a horror movie poster, and it just sends a chill right down your spine. And for the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose, this wasn't just some marketing ploy. It points to a real and deeply tragic true story. The story of a young German woman named Anneliese Michel.
So, let's start with her story. Anneliese Michel was born in West Germany back in 1952. Her life and her absolutely horrifying death would become one of the most famous and controversial exorcism cases in modern history. It really forced this difficult conversation between religious faith and medical science.
This timeline, it just shows how tragically this whole thing spiraled out of control. It all started when she was just 16, with what looked like a seizure. A year later, it happened again, but doctors couldn't find anything wrong. Then, in 1970, things really escalated. She's hospitalized, starts seeing strange colors, and hears voices telling her she's damned. She gets a diagnosis, temporal lobe epilepsy. But her behavior just gets worse and worse, leading her deeply religious parents to turn away from medicine and straight to the church. 10 months and 67 grueling exorcisms later, she was dead.
And you can start to understand why her family was absolutely terrified. Her actions were so extreme, so profoundly disturbing. She would do hundreds of these deep knee-bend prayers until her knee ligaments actually tore. She hid under a table, barking like a dog for 2 days straight. She ate spiders, coal, even a bird. For her family, this didn't look like an illness. It looked like pure evil.
During these exorcisms, the priests claimed that Anneliese was possessed by 6 specific demons. And it's a really strange list, right? A mix of famous villains from the Bible like Lucifer and Cain, historical tyrants like Nero and Hitler, and even a disgraced local priest from the 1500s. Now, as we're about to see, this list is actually a crucial clue to figuring out what was really going on. Anneliese's story is it's shocking, but it's not entirely one of a kind. It really forces us to ask this fundamental question about what's actually happening in these extreme cases. And it's not the only story like this. I mean, take the totally bizarre case of Michael Boatwright. Here's an American guy found unconscious in a hotel room. He wakes up from a coma, and suddenly, he can only speak fluent Swedish, and he's insisting his name is Johan Ek. He had absolutely no memory of being Michael Boatwright, no memory of his son or his ex-wives. Baffling, isn't it? So we're really left with 2 totally different explanations for things like this. On one side, you have the supernatural view. Some kind of external, evil entity literally invades and takes over. And on the other side, you've got the scientific view, a profound mental health condition that causes a person's own identity to fragment from the inside. Which brings us to the core question here. What is the real source of these transformations? Is it some invading soul from another realm? Or is the answer locked away inside the incredible complexities of the human mind? Let's follow the science. To understand what might have been happening to Anneliese and others, we need to talk about a psychological concept called dissociation. It's really the key to unlocking this whole mystery. You've almost certainly heard of this term before, right? Probably from movies like Fight Club or Psycho. Multiple personality disorder was the old, well-known name for it, and it describes pretty much exactly what it sounds like. A single person who seems to be housing multiple, totally separate personalities. But today, that term is outdated. The one clinicians actually use is a much more accurate name, dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And the key word here is dissociative, which means a disconnection or a separation. See, it's not really about having multiple people in one body. It's about one person's identity becoming broken and fragmented. Okay, so how does an identity even work in the first place? Well, a psychologist named Carl Rogers broke our idea of a self-concept down into 3 pretty simple parts. First, there's your self-image. That's who you believe you are. Second, your ideal self, who you want to be. And third, your self-esteem, basically how you feel about the gap between those first 2.
Now, for most of us, these parts all work together to form one cohesive identity. But in dissociative identity disorder, that self-concept literally shatters. It splinters into these distinct, separate identities that are known as alters. There's usually a main personality, called the host, But these other alters can actually take control, and each one can have its own name, age, memories, even its own gestures and way of talking.
So the big question is, why? What on earth could cause a person's sense of self to break apart so completely? Well, the answer is incredibly painful, but it's also incredibly important for us to understand.
Just look at this number, 90%. In studies done all across North America and Europe, roughly 90% of people with DID have a history of severe childhood abuse and trauma. We're talking physical, sexual, or emotional. 90%. That is absolutely not a coincidence.
And that reveals this heartbreaking truth. Dissociation isn't madness. It's a survival strategy. When a child is facing trauma that is just too overwhelming to bear, the brain does something pretty remarkable to protect itself. It splits. It creates another personality, an alter, to take the pain, which allows the main identity, the host, to kind of escape. It's the mind's desperate attempt to build a wall around a reality that is just unbearable.
Okay, so now that we have this scientific framework, let's go back to the tragic story of Anneliese Michel, because when we do, all the pieces of the puzzle start to fit together in a brand new and honestly an even more tragic way. Remember that bizarre list of demons? Well, when you look at them through this lens, they're not random invaders at all. They are direct reflections of her life and her deepest fears. The biblical figures? They came from her hyper-religious childhood. Hitler and Nero? They were the ultimate symbols of evil in her German culture. And Valentine Fleischmann? He was a real, local priest who had been disgraced. Her splintered identities were built from the materials of her own world. This scientific view lines up perfectly with what her doctors actually diagnosed. They didn't see demons. They saw a tragic combination of severe but treatable illnesses. Temporal lobe epilepsy, which we know can cause terrifying hallucinations. Anorexia nervosa, which explains her extreme weight loss, and a hyper-religious personality disorder, where faith becomes an obsession filled with delusions. And this is the most heartbreaking part of the whole story. The court eventually concluded that Anneliese Michel wasn't killed by demons. She died from starvation and dehydration because the exorcisms prevented her from getting the medical and psychiatric care she so desperately needed. Her own parents and the two priests were ultimately convicted of negligent homicide. Her death was preventable. Anneliese's story it's a powerful and tragic reminder of the real danger of misunderstanding mental illness. It really highlights the urgent need for us to move away from stigma and towards science and compassion. And let's be honest, the media often makes things so much worse. Way too often, movies portray people with DID as these dangerous, unpredictable villains just for entertainment. Or maybe even worse, they use the illness as a cheap punchline. These portrayals aren't just wrong, they are actively harmful. They build stigma, they create fear, and they make it even harder for people who are truly suffering to get the help they need. So this brings us to a final, really important question. If what we once called a demon is actually a misunderstood illness born out of trauma, what does that mean for us? It means the solution isn't ritual or fear. It's empathy, it's scientific understanding, and it's compassionate care. It totally reframes the idea of an exorcism, not as casting out some evil spirit, but as helping a person integrate the fractured pieces of themselves so they can become whole again.